the US Open. Are you in the mood for creating more history this year?
I'm always in the mood for more history. That means this month was wonderful for me.
The girl who made Germany forget Sabalenka existed, and the silence that followed. Aryna Sabalenka, four-time finalist at one of Europe's most prestigious tennis tournaments, the reigning world #1, a player who has owned every conversation on the WTA Tour for the better part of 3 years. And then one morning, you wake up, check your phone, and the entire tennis world is talking about a 20-year-old from Manila who wasn't even supposed to be in the draw. Not as a runner-up to your legacy, not in the same breath as a footnote. As the main event, the headline act, the reason thousands of Filipino flags just got packed into bags and boarded flights to Stuttgart, Germany. That is not a hypothetical. That is exactly what happened at the 2026 Porsche Tennis Grand Prix. And if you think that's wild, wait until you hear the part where two former ATP professionals publicly declared, without hesitation, without qualification, that Alexandra Ila already draws bigger and louder crowds than Sabalenka and Coco Gauff combined. When Sabalenka heard that, the tennis world went completely silent. And that silence tells you everything. Stay right here, because this story is one of the most extraordinary things to happen in women's tennis in a very long time. And we are just getting started. Let's set the stage properly, because context is everything. The Porsche Tennis Grand Prix has been running since 1978. 48 editions. Champions whose names are stitched into the very fabric of women's tennis history. Navratilova, Hingis, Sharapova, Kerber, Barty. This is not some boutique tournament on a forgotten corner of the calendar. Stuttgart is prestige. Stuttgart is history. Stuttgart is the kind of stage where legends are confirmed, not created. The Porsche Arena has hosted some of the most electric atmospheres in WTA tennis, and German tennis crowds are among the most knowledgeable and demanding on the entire circuit. They do not manufacture enthusiasm for players who have not earned it. They simply do not do that. And yet something shifted in 2026. Something nobody in women's tennis predicted. Something that required going all the way back to a single afternoon in Miami, Florida, March 2025, to fully understand. Alexandra Ila was 19 years old, ranked outside the top 60, a quietly developing talent who had been training at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, Spain since she was 12 years old, largely unknown outside Philippine tennis circles. A junior prospect with serious potential and zero mainstream recognition. Then Miami happened, and it happened fast. She tore through that draw like nobody saw coming. Match after match, opponent after opponent, she carved through one of the most competitive fields on the WTA calendar. She reached the semifinals of a WTA 1000 event, the first Filipina in the history of the sport to do so. Her coach pulled her aside before that semifinal and told her, plainly, that she was in the last four of a Masters in Miami, playing for a spot against the world #1. She lost that semifinal to Jessica Pegula, but the loss almost didn't matter, because the awakening that happened around that run changed everything. Filipino fans worldwide mobilized overnight. Not gradually, overnight. Social media detonated. Broadcasts that had been drawing moderate viewership were suddenly flooded with traffic. Courts where Ila played became standing-room-only environments. The tennis world had seen passionate fan bases before. They'd seen national movements, political moments, generational talents inspire loyalty that crossed borders. But this was different in texture, different in scale, and completely different in geographic spread. A nation of over 100 million people, passionate, emotionally invested, historically underrepresented in elite tennis, had finally found its champion. And once that community found her, it did not let go. Steve Johnson, the former American professional and world top 21 player, described it on the Nothing Major podcast in February 2026 with the kind of bluntness that only former athletes can get away with. He said Ila was producing the same effect on crowds that Brazilian sensation João Fonseca had generated on the men's side. Courts packed to absolute capacity, energy so overwhelming that neutral viewers tuned in purely to experience the atmosphere. And then he said something that stopped the tennis world cold. He said it was bigger than Fonseca. And that was before Germany. Now here is where the Sabalenka dimension enters the picture, and this is where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable for the establishment. Arina Sabalenka did not just casually miss Stuttgart in 2026. She missed a tournament where she had 4 runner-up finishes. 4 times she had stood in that final at the Porsche Arena and walked away without the trophy, without the Porsche 911 Carrera Cabriolet that goes to the champion. Yelena Ostapenko was the one who denied her most recently, beating her in the 2025 final. For Sabalenka, Stuttgart represents unfinished business of the most specific and painful kind. It is arguably the single most significant title she has not yet won on the European clay circuit. Her absence in 2026 is therefore not a minor scheduling footnote. It is a gap in her legacy pursuit, sitting there on the record, unresolved. But here is the dimension that truly cuts deeper than any of that. While Sabalenka is absent from a tournament she has spent years trying to conquer, the conversation that consumed tennis media in the weeks building toward Stuttgart was not about her unfinished business at this venue. It was not about her 4 final appearances or her drive to finally close it out. The conversation was entirely about whether a player Sabalenka has never even faced on court, a 20-year-old ranked 45th in the world, had already surpassed her as the sport's most compelling and commercially significant attendance draw. Sam Querrey, the former world number 11, asked the question directly on the Nothing Major podcast. He asked his co-host whether Ila was the biggest draw in women's tennis on the entire planet, whether she was bigger than Sabalenka, whether she was bigger than Coco Gauff. Steve Johnson did not pause. He did not hedge. He said yes. One word. Unqualified. And when Johnson says something like that, you listen, because he is not a commentator paid to generate controversy. He spent years on the ATP Tour. He knows what genuine crowd magnetism looks and feels like from the inside. His assessment carries weight that a social media hot take simply cannot touch. John Isner reinforced it from a different angle entirely. He pointed to the untapped scale of the Philippine market, a nation that had never previously had a genuine elite-level star in women's tennis, a population that had been waiting decades for precisely this moment. He said flatly that they finally have a star, and that the energy accompanying that cannot be replicated by any single country's established fan base. Sabalenka has Belarus behind her. Gauff has the United States. Swiatek draws Poland. Ila draws 100 million people who have been waiting for this for generations. That is the arithmetic that made the establishment go quiet. The numbers backed every word of it. At the Australian Open earlier in 2026, a wave of Filipino fans rushing toward one of the outer courts to watch Ila created a bottleneck so severe that security had to turn people away while others crowded around big screens and nearby food courts waving flags just to catch a glimpse. Her pre-tournament press conference in Melbourne attracted approximately 171,000 online viewers. For context, Carlos Alcaraz drew roughly 29,000. Coco Gauff drew around the same. Arina Sabalenka drew approximately 9,000. Those are not close numbers. Those are not in the same universe. Now, when Ila entered the Stuttgart main draw, she did so as a replacement for Zheng Qinwen, who withdrew due to injury. By conventional tennis logic, a 45th ranked player entering a WTA 500 field as a late substitute is a scheduling convenience. She gets one line in the draw announcement and nothing more. That is how the sport typically handles these situations. Stuttgart's organizers did not handle it that way. Their official social media post announcing Ila's inclusion told fans they could look forward to seeing Alexandra step in. That specific language, framing her arrival as something fans should look forward to, was a deliberate choice. Tournament directors do not write that way for footnotes. They write that way for draws, for marquee names, for players whose presence changes the commercial and atmospheric character of an event. And German fans responded exactly as the organizers anticipated. The Filipino diaspora across Europe, which had already packed the arena in Linz, Austria just days earlier, immediately began coordinating attendance in Stuttgart. The same flags that filled the Linz Design Center were being pulled out of closets and packed into bags for the Porsche Arena. That is what the phrase "like never before" actually looks like in practice. It is not manufactured hype. It is not a marketing campaign. It is a genuine, organic, cross-continental fan movement that has attached itself to one player and followed her wherever she goes on the tennis calendar. But here's the part that demanded honest acknowledgement, because no story this compelling is without its complications. Ila is not a clay court specialist. Her 2026 season was built almost entirely on hard courts: Miami, Dubai, Indian Wells. Clay is a fundamentally different conversation, and her early clay season results made that plain. In Linz, she opened with a controlled win over Austrian top seed Julia Grabher, then ran into Yelena Ostapenko in round 2. Ila led 4-2 in the first set. She led 5-1 in the second, and she still lost 6-4, 7-5. The defending Stuttgart champion solved the puzzle on clay, and Ostapenko was now in the Stuttgart draw as well, carrying a fresh psychological edge and the memory of having neutralized what Ila does best. Ila herself addressed the physical reality of competing on clay against bigger, more powerful opponents. In an interview during the WTA's coverage of her season, she said with disarming self-awareness that everything she does is essentially preparation for opponents who are bigger and stronger, and that she is still in the process of getting there. That kind of honesty is genuinely rare at 20 years old. But self-awareness, no matter how admirable, does not win points on indoor clay against Grand Slam champions. Results do that, and Stuttgart was the moment where the results either needed to follow the narrative or deliver the sport's favorite lesson about perfectly written stories.